Something strange and noticeable is happening in America's wealthiest postal states, both on paper and in reality, but most people haven't noticed yet. For the past few years, I've been tracking an unprecedented migration pattern among high-income Americans and non-Americans that is reshaping American economic models. Everyone might think it's because of remote work, but it's not about remote flexibility or lifestyle changes. It's about variable tax methods and wealth preservation decisions that are creating permanent shifts in state tax bases. If you look at the data, it tells a story that mainstream media won't report because it challenges popular political narratives. But the numbers don't lie, and the consequences are truly enormous for both immigrants and the states they leave. Listen carefully, because if you're earning over $200,000 annually, understanding this trend could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next decade. And if you aren't tracking these patterns, you're missing out on one of the most significant wealth redistribution events in modern American history. I started noticing this pattern 3 years ago when clients began asking about state residency changes with increasing frequency. These weren't casual conversations about lifestyle choices. These were detailed discussions about tax residency strategies, foundation structures, and multi-state planning, indicating a significant migration of wealth. What began as isolated conversations evolved into a clear trend, now a wave of migration accelerating every quarter. Let me share the facts revealed by the data, because you will be truly surprised by the situation this movement has created. Between 2020 and 2023, a total of $100 billion in annual income shifted from high-tax states to low-tax states. This is not a general population movement. It specifically means that high-income individuals are taking their tax burdens with them. California alone lost more than $24 billion in annual taxable income during this period. New York lost $19 billion. New Jersey, Connecticut, and Illinois make up the top 5 losers, with total annual tax-based losses exceeding $60 billion. So where is this money going? Florida gained $36 billion in new taxable income. Texas gained $28 billion. Tennessee, Nevada, and Wyoming gained more than $20 billion in new tax base from high-income immigrants. But what makes this particularly important is this: these are not temporary displacements. Wealthy individuals and families who take these steps establish permanent legal residency with sophisticated planning to ensure they never return to high-tax areas. When working with high-net-worth clients, I can say that once someone goes through the process of changing their tax residency, they rarely reverse that decision. Because the savings are so large and the planning so comprehensive, it's not possible to randomly undo it. Consider what this means concretely. A family earning $2 million annually in California pays approximately $240,000 in state income tax. The same family pays 0 state income tax in Florida. Over 10 years, this translates to a saving of $2.4 million. Enough to buy investment real estate, finance children's education, or build wealth across generations. To explain this mathematically, high-income earners are making rational economic decisions based on tax policy differences that increase significantly over time. Several specific policy changes created the perfect storm for this migration wave, and understanding these catalysts explains why the trend is accelerating rather than stabilizing. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act included a provision that limited state and local tax deductions to $10,000 annually. For high earners in states like California, New York, and New Jersey, this change effectively raised their federal tax burden by tens of thousands of dollars annually. A client in Manhattan earning $1.5 million previously could deduct his $45,000 in state and local taxes from his federal return. After 2017, he could only deduct $10,000. meaning he pays federal taxes on an additional $35,000 of income. Combined with losing previous federal deduction benefits, his total tax burden increased by over $15,000 annually. This policy change made relocating to no-tax states immediately more attractive because the federal tax savings from SALT deduction limitations could be recovered through state tax elimination. But the real acceleration came during 2020 to 2021, when several high-tax states raised taxes on wealthy residents, specifically to fund COVID-related spending. California created new tax brackets targeting millionaires. New York and New Jersey increased top marginal rates. These increases came precisely when remote work made geographic location less relevant for many higher. The timing was devastating for these states. They raised taxes on their most mobile taxpayers exactly when those taxpayers had the flexibility to relocate without changing their careers. I watched clients who had lived in New York for decades suddenly become interested in Florida residency. These weren't lifestyle-driven moves. These were strategic responses to policy changes that made remaining in high-tax states economically irrational for sophisticated planners. What makes this migration different from previous population shifts is the level of sophisticated planning involved. These aren't impulse relocations. These are carefully orchestrated tax domicile changes involving teams of attorneys, CPAs, and wealth managers. The planning typically begins 12–18 months before the actual move. Clients establish business entities in target states, begin spending time at properties in new jurisdictions, and carefully document their intention to change tax domicile. A typical high net worth relocation involves purchasing property in the target state, obtaining driver's licenses and voter registration, changing bank accounts and investment accounts, and establishing social and professional connections that demonstrate genuine residency rather than tax avoidance. The legal standard for establishing tax domicile varies by state, but most require demonstrating both physical presence and intent to remain permanently. Sophisticated planners ensure their clients meet and exceed these requirements to avoid future tax authority challenges. One client relocated from New Jersey to Florida by purchasing a $3.2 million home in Naples, joining country clubs, transferring his investment accounts to Florida-based advisors, and spending 200+ days annually in Florida for 2 consecutive years before formally declaring residency. This level of planning isn't casual tax avoidance. This is permanent wealth preservation strategy that treats tax domicile as a major financial decision requiring professional guidance and long-term commitment. The wealthy individuals making these moves understand that tax policy is the most controllable variable in their financial planning. They can't control market returns or economic cycles, but they can control their tax jurisdiction through residency decisions. Understanding why this migration accelerated requires examining the psychological factors that drive high earners to uproot their lives for tax savings. For most people earning $75,000 annually, the difference between living in Texas versus California might be $3,000, $5,000 in state taxes. That's meaningful but not life-changing. For someone earning $2 million annually, the difference is $200,000 plus in taxes, minus enough to fund a child's entire education or purchase income-producing real estate. At high income levels, tax differences become the dominant factor in lifestyle economics. Everything else, minus housing costs, social environment, business opportunities, becomes secondary to the fundamental mathematics of after-tax wealth accumulation. But there's also a psychological element related to fairness and reciprocity. High earners increasingly feel that high-tax states are targeting them specifically while providing services that don't justify the premium they're paying. During client conversations, I consistently hear frustrations about education quality, infrastructure conditions, and government efficiency in high-tax states. These individuals pay the highest marginal rates but often live in areas with crowded schools, deteriorating roads, and rising crime rates. The comparison with low-tax states becomes stark when wealthy families can access better services in Florida or Texas while paying dramatically less in taxes. The value proposition of high-tax states has deteriorated precisely as their tax burdens have increased. There's also a network effect accelerating the migration. When wealthy individuals relocate, they share their experiences with friends and colleagues in similar situations. Success stories create social proof that makes relocation seem less risky and more normal. A client who moved from Connecticut to Florida reports that 6 of his former neighbors have now relocated to no-tax states. This clustering effect means migration patterns tend to accelerate rather than stabilize once they begin. The fiscal mathematics of this migration creates serious long-term challenges for the states losing high earners, and the problems compound over time rather than stabilizing. California's top 1% of earners pays approximately 50% of the state's income tax revenue. When these individuals relocate, they're not just taking their future tax payments, they're reducing the funding base for essential services that remaining residents depend on. New York faces similar mathematics. The top 10% of earners provide over 70% of state income tax revenue. Even modest migration rates among this group create significant budget shortfalls that must be addressed through spending cuts or tax increases on remaining residents. The political response to these budget shortfalls typically involves raising taxes on remaining high earners, which accelerates migration by making the tax differential with no-tax states even more dramatic. This creates what economists call a fiscal death spiral. Tax increases drive out mobile high earners, reducing tax base, requiring further tax increases, driving out more high earners, and continuing until the mathematics become unsustainable. Illinois has been experiencing this pattern for over a decade. Repeated tax increases have driven consistent outmigration of wealthy residents, reducing tax base, requiring more tax increases, and creating a cycle that's difficult to break without fundamental policy changes. The challenge for high-tax states is that their most mobile taxpayers are also their most valuable taxpayers from a revenue perspective. Losing a family that pays $300,000 annually in state taxes requires attracting 15 mid-20 middle-income families. To replace that revenue, mid- and middle-income families are generally less mobile and less likely to relocate specifically for tax reasons. States gaining wealthy migrants understand the economic development opportunity and are actively competing to attract high-earning relocations. Florida has no state income tax, no inheritance tax, and constitutional protections for homesteads that appeal specifically to wealthy residents. The state also offers sophisticated trust and estate planning options that complement tax advantages. Texas combines no state income tax with a business-friendly regulatory environment that attracts entrepreneurs and executives. The state actively recruits companies and high-earning individuals from high-tax jurisdictions through economic development programs. Nevada and Tennessee offer similar tax advantages while providing different lifestyle and business opportunities that appeal to various wealthy demographics. These states understand that attracting high-earning residents creates multipliers throughout their communities. A wealthy family relocating brings not just their tax payments but their spending on local services, real estate purchases, and business activities that create employment for other residents. The competitive advantage compounds over time. As no-tax states build larger populations of wealthy residents, they develop more sophisticated financial services, cultural amenities, and business networks that make them even more attractive to future wealthy migrants. Florida has particularly benefited from this dynamic. Major financial institutions have established significant operations in Miami and Tampa to serve wealthy clients who relocated from high-tax states. This infrastructure development makes Florida increasingly competitive with traditional financial centers. The implications of this migration trend vary dramatically depending on your income level and current location. For high earners currently in high-tax states, the mathematics strongly favor relocation if you have geographic flexibility. The tax savings compound over time and create generational wealth differences that justify the inconvenience and costs of relocating. If you're earning $500, plus annually in California, New York, or New Jersey, the potential savings from relocating to a no-tax state likely exceed $50,000 annually. Over a 20-year career, this represents over $1 million in after-tax wealth that can be preserved through residency decisions. For high earners in low-tax states, the competitive advantage is increasing as more wealth concentrates in your jurisdictions. Property values, business opportunities, and cultural amenities are improving as wealthy migrants bring their resources and networks. For middle-income residents in high-tax states, the migration of high earners creates fiscal pressure that typically results in higher taxes or reduced services for remaining residents. Understanding this dynamic can inform personal financial planning and political engagement decisions. For middle-income residents in receiving states, wealthy migration typically improves local economies through increased spending and business activity, but can also increase housing costs and change community dynamics in ways that affect affordability. This migration pattern is creating significant business and investment opportunities that sophisticated investors are already exploiting. Real estate in wealthy enclaves of receiving states has appreciated dramatically as high earners bid up property prices. Areas like Naples, Florida, Austin, Texas, and Nashville, Tennessee have seen luxury property values increase 30 to 50% as wealthy migrants compete for desirable locations. Service businesses catering to wealthy clients, private banking, wealth management, tax planning, legal services are expanding rapidly in receiving states to serve relocated clients who bring their financial needs and professional relationships. Traditional financial centers are losing business as wealthy clients relocate. New York and San Francisco financial services firms are opening offices in Miami, Austin, and other receiving markets to maintain relationships with relocated clients. The business formation patterns are also shifting. New businesses started by wealthy entrepreneurs increasingly choose Delaware incorporation with operations in low-tax states rather than incorporating in high-tax states where the founders might have previously lived. This creates long-term competitive advantages for low-tax states in business formation, job creation, and economic development that compound over decades rather than reversing when tax policies change. Given these trends, here are 3 fundamental principles for making intelligent decisions about geographic tax strategy. Principle 1, most people focus on current year tax differences without calculating the compound effect of tax savings over entire careers. A $50,000 annual tax difference becomes a $2 million wealth difference over 20 years when savings are invested at reasonable returns. This calculation should include not just income taxes, but estate taxes, inheritance taxes, and property taxes that vary significantly between states. Comprehensive planning considers all tax obligations over multiple generations rather than just current income taxes. The key insight is that tax domicile decisions are wealth preservation strategies rather than lifestyle choices. Approach them with the same analytical rigor you'd apply to major investment decisions because that's essentially what they are. Principle 2, high-tax states facing budget shortfalls from wealthy migration consistently choose to raise taxes on remaining high earners rather than reduce spending or lower rates to attract back departed residents. This creates a one-way ratchet where tax differentials between high-tax and no-tax states continue widening over time. Early movers benefit from smaller tax differentials while late movers face larger differentials that make the decisions easier but the savings greater. Geographic tax arbitrage opportunities typically increase rather than decrease over time, making earlier action more beneficial than delayed action for those with flexibility. Principle 3, successful tax domicile changes require genuine relocation with permanent intent rather than temporary residency manipulation. Tax authorities in high-tax states aggressively audit wealthy individuals claiming residency changes, and they have sophisticated tools for challenging incomplete relocations. This means tax migration decisions should align with lifestyle preferences and business requirements rather than being purely tax-motivated. The most successful relocations involve families who genuinely prefer their new locations rather than those who view relocation as a necessary sacrifice for tax savings. The planning should also anticipate future life changes, aging parents, children's education, business opportunities that might create pressure to return to high-tax states. Comprehensive planning prevents situations where temporary returns become permanent relocations that eliminate previously achieved tax savings. This migration pattern can be said to represent more than just temporary population movements arising in response to policy differences. It is creating lasting changes in the American economic landscape that will persist for generations. Wealthy residential areas are concentrating in low-tax states while high-tax states are losing their most mobile and highest contributing residents. This concentration creates self-reinforcing advantages for receiving states and cumulative disadvantages for losing states over decades. The political consequences are also significant. As wealthy residents concentrate in certain states, their political influence shifts, potentially impacting federal policy debates about taxation. Business establishment, investment capital, and economic dynamism are driving wealthy individuals to low-tax regions. This creates regional competitive advantages that persist long after the individuals who initiated the migration. Understanding these trends enables better decision-making about where to establish businesses, where to invest, and where to plan personal financial strategies. The geographical concentration of wealth creates opportunities and risks that will define American economic development for generations to come. For high-income individuals, the question isn't whether this trend will continue. Mathematical incentives and policy trajectories make its continuation almost certain. The question is whether to join the migration early when transition costs are lower and competitive advantages improve, or to wait until trends become so pronounced that migration becomes more difficult and expensive. Families and individuals taking these steps now are positioning themselves to protect and accumulate wealth for the next few decades. Those who delay these decisions may find themselves increasingly disadvantaged as tax disparities widen and the best opportunities for relocation become more competitive and costly.